the summary segment, and Dr. Krauss.
This is the final.
This is it.
Oh, okay. In tonight's debate, I've tried to show you that God's existence is more probable given certain facts than it would have been without them. And that is by definition what it means to say that there's evidence for God's existence. First of all, we looked at the existence of contingent beings, and I explained that given the existence of God, it is more probable that contingent beings would exist than on atheism, because on atheism there is no explanation for the existence of contingent beings. And to try to say that there need not be an explanation for the existence of the universe is arbitrary and unjustified. It commits the taxicab fallacy. So I think the very existence of contingent beings makes God's existence more probable than it would otherwise have been. Secondly, what about the origin of the universe? I used both philosophical arguments and scientific evidence to show that the universe began to exist. Dr. Krauss dropped his objections to the philosophical arguments. We saw that while the infinite is a useful mathematical concept, when you try to translate it into the real world, it results in self-contradictory situations, and therefore the past must be finite. And we saw, secondly, that this is indeed what science has confirmed. The Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem shows that the quantum vacuum out of which our material state has evolved cannot be eternal in the past, but must have had a beginning. The Hartle-Hawking model itself that Dr. Krauss has appealed to involves an absolute beginning of the universe. He says, however, that this universe explains how it came into existence from absolute non-being. And I contradicted that by saying that the point from which the universe quantum tunnels is not nothing on these models. Listen to what Hartle and Hawking write in their scholarly article on this. They say the volume vanishes at the north and south poles, even though these are perfectly regular points of the four geometry. One therefore would not expect the wave function to vanish at the vanishing 3 volume. In the case of the universe, we would interpret the fact that the wave function can be finite and non-zero at the 0-3 geometry as allowing topological fluctuations of the 3 geometry. So they're clearly not talking about something coming from nothing. Indeed, I mean, think about it, folks. There is no physics of non-being. That's absurd. There's only a physics of things that exist, that are real. So it's impossible for physics to explain how being could arise from non-being. There is no physics of non-being. And therefore, given that the universe did have an absolute beginning, I think it fairly cries out for the existence of a transcendent cause of the universe, which is most plausibly identified as God, rather than some abstract object. What about the fine-tuning of the universe? Here, Dr. Krauss attacked one example of fine-tuning, the low entropy condition, and he says that this is explicable by a mechanism that determines the fine-tuning. I beg to differ. Robin Collins, who has occupied himself extensively with this, writes, the universe started in a very low entropy state. It is enormously improbable for the universe to have started in the macro state necessary for the existence of life. The various ways of avoiding this improbability are all highly problematic. And in particular, he looks at Penrose's suggestion that the low entropy is the result of a very special law and says that Penrose's proposal has not been accepted by the majority of physicists today. So, look, we've got this universe that in multiple ways is fine-tuned for our existence. And that obviously, I think, makes the existence of God more probable than it would have been without them. It is highly improbable that this fine-tuning is going to go away. Ernan McMullen of the University of Notre Dame says it seems safe to say that later theory, no matter how different, will turn up approximately the same numbers. And the numerous constraints that have to be imposed on these numbers are too specific and too numerous to evaporate entirely. So fine-tuning is a physical feature of the universe, and I think it's better explained by God. Quickly then, what about moral values and duties? Here Dr. Krauss said you can define kind and compassionate independent of God. Of course you can. That is a question of moral semantics. Mine is an argument concerning moral ontology. That is to say, not the definition or meaning of terms, but they're grounding in reality. And apart from God, there is no foundation for objective moral values and duties. Therefore, if you believe that they exist, then you should believe in God. Finally, the resurrection of Jesus. He's never denied those historical facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth. And that gives good reason to believe that the best explanation of these facts is that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be, and that entails that God exists.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. Dr. Krauss, your summary.
Just so you know, I want to show that last little bit if you want to put my computer up in a second. Okay, good. We'll get to Richard Feynman in a second. The 5 points that Dr. Craig has made. Contingent beings. Somehow he argues that natural phenomena cannot explain things which didn't have to exist. It's something I find remarkable. Many things didn't have to exist. You didn't have to exist here on Earth, but we understand a series of steps by which you were caused to exist naturally, including a large comet that killed that fell in the Yucatan and killed the dinosaurs, making an evolutionary niche for mammals. None of that was required. But more importantly, in fact, if you wish, contingent beings, in fact, must exist in a universe whether or not there's a God. Because if there are many universes having different laws of physics, there must exist one universe in which contingent beings exist. And you can ask yourself, in which universe will those people ask the question? They'll ask the question in the universe in which they exist. If there are many universes, there must be a universe in which we exist. Our existence does not prove anything except that we exist. And in fact, it's required if that existence is at all possible. In fact, the laws of physics tell us that which is not prohibited is required. That which is not impossible must happen somewhere. That's the other amazing thing about the universe. The strangest things are happening every second because those things which don't violate the laws of nature are required. And in many universes, if there's one universe in which life can exist, it will exist, and then it will ask itself the question, why do I exist? The origin of the universe. First of all, let me point out, there are no contradictions. I totally disagree. There are no contradictions with infinities that I know of. No mathematical contradictions. I don't like it physically, but it's possible. And if it's true, I'll have to learn to live with it. I'll just have to learn to live with it. I don't know if it's true. I'll find out. I do repeat, however, unfortunately, Dr. Craig, when he talked about the fact that the wave function is not zero at the boundaries, is interesting, but the wave function is not a physical quantity. It's a mathematical quantity that determines probabilities. So what it's saying is that the probability of creating a universe is not zero. Great. That means the probability that something will come from nothing is not zero without God, by the very example he used. The fine-tuning, I wish I could clarify this for Dr. Craig. In fact, Alan Guth, who he keeps invoking like a mantra, developed a theory which is the only theory we have that explains, I was going to show you the data, it explains all the data in cosmology. It's a beautiful theory. It's called inflation. It's a theory that arises naturally given the laws of particle physics. And it's a theory where the entropy of the universe increases by 10 to the 80th in a time frame of 10 to the minus 35 seconds. Naturally, by known laws of physics. It is, in fact, the way we believe the current entropy of the universe developed, because it's so beautiful, and it also explains what we see. There's no problem creating entropy. There's also no problem creating space. There's no problem creating energy. You can have a universe with fine energy get bigger and bigger and bigger, because gravity has something called negative specific heat and negative pressure. It's really weird, but it's true, whether or not Dr. Craig likes it or not. Those aspects that he finds peculiar about our universe are in every way that I know of understandable by known dynamical physical processes. Moreover, the universe we live in is not fine-tuned for life. No one knows that because we do not know the different kinds of life that can exist. As for morality, he assumes I assume there's no objective reality of morality. I've never said that. I don't know where he gets that idea of. But what I do claim is that whether morality is objective or not is a question for us to determine. And objective morality does not require God because, in fact, for the reasons I said earlier, God, if God exists, is not, if there's objective morality, then God doesn't have the freedom to determine the morality, decide that it's compassionate and kind. Well, some people think it's compassionate and kind to sexually molest and disfigure young women. It's compassionate and kind to ensure that they do not enjoy sex. That's compassionate and kind. Their God tells them to do it. Okay? I think you would agree that we just should get rid of the middleman and decide what's compassionate and kind on the basis of common sense. As for the resurrection, let me make it clear right now. By far, since all of the evidence, the historical evidence, is determined by anecdotal eyewitness arguments made by eyewitnesses 50 years after the fact, it is far more likely that the resurrection is imagined than real. Just as I think Dr. Craig would argue it's far more likely that Muhammad didn't rise to heaven on a horse, but someone said he did, and people believed it. And the fact that people believe it, the fact that people are willing to die for it now, means nothing any more than it does in the fact that people are willing to fly planes into New York because they believe that someone rose on a horse to heaven. And I know Dr. Craig doesn't believe that because I've heard it. So none of these arguments he's given give evidence for anything except a wonderful universe that we are trying to understand.
Thank you, Dr. Krauss.